Welcome back. Today and tomorrow we're discussing the U.S. detention facility known as Guantanamo Bay. On the next show we look at some of the experiences people have had, but today we continue our look at recent legal developments affecting the detainees. With us for that we have Kindra Ratanda, a major and a former prosecutor with the military commissions at Guantanamo and author of the new release book Honor Bound, Inside the Guantanamo Trials. Also with us from New York is Emmy McLean, an attorney with the Guantanamo Global Justice Initiative. We're going to get back to our discussion. Major Ratanda, you wanted to respond to the question that Ahmed had put in from Ethiopia, or sorry, Daniel had said from Ethiopia, about how can you justify keeping these people incarcerated and then say you're giving them classes and facilities?
Sure. Well, under the laws of war, what happens is when you capture your enemy, you hold them until the end of the war. And that's what we're doing. Look, it's no crime to be a soldier. It's no crime to be a soldier and fight for the other side. But what the Geneva Conventions are designed to do is bring wars to swift end. And so when you capture the detainee, when you capture the enemy, you simply hold them. And that is what we're doing here. We're doing what we've always done in every war and what the law requires.
I want to quote your book here, Honor Bound, where you talk about freedoms. And in that, there's a section I was reading which said, however, in a war our enemies call a religious war, where radical Islamists use their religion to justify brutal beheading of innocent civilians, is it smart to exceed the Geneva Conventions? Question mark. Now, what you're saying is there a point where you can break the rules? What is permissible in your...
Actually, I'm not saying is there a point where you can break the rules. I don't think we should break the rules. What I'm saying is, under the Geneva Conventions, we can hold these detainees until the end of hostilities.
Now it's very vague and open. When you say the end of the war, though, this is now when it's a very confusing issue. I mean, what is the war? What is the war in particular?
Well, we're in a war on terror, and obviously our two battlefields, or our fronts right now, are Iraq and Afghanistan. Now look, we never know on day one when a war will end. We didn't call the 7 years war that on day one or day two or year 6. But the war will end, and when it does, they'll be repatriated.
But the issue of terrorism has been going on for centuries, and of course the label war on terror, which is very controversial, especially outside the US, is something that's really been created by this administration. So in theory, this is something that could go on indefinitely.
Well, it hasn't been created by this administration, frankly. Osama bin Laden declared war on the United States going back to 1999, frankly, and then attacked us on our own soil in the United States. Now, in terms of when the war will end, we just don't know. But we do know that it will end. It won't necessarily end with a peace treaty like a traditional war does. We don't anticipate that we'll be sitting down and agreeing on a treaty with Osama bin Laden. But we know that it will end. And in any event, if I could add just one important benchmark, is it's not over until U.S. troops are home. It's not over until U.S. troops come back to the United States.
Let me bring in Emmy McLean again, and here ask how much of this debate on Guantanamo and the issues surrounding this hang on the issue that it's an election year and that everyone is posturing politically in the USA.
Certainly what we've seen in the duration of the existence of Guantanamo is dramatic changes that happen for political necessity. The secret prisons, which were not disclosed by President Bush for years after they were known, all of a sudden were emptied right before a congressional election, and people were brought out of secret prison where they had been disappeared for years to Guantanamo. So certainly we now see the 5 men who are being tried in a massive military commission trial at Guantanamo months before the election is about to take place. So I am not skeptical of that assertion. And I just want to also quickly respond to Major Ratanda's comment about the war on terror, which is how she defined the war. You correctly stated that the war, there has been terrorism for many, many, many years, and we have had wars on nouns before, and we're actually continuing with a war on a noun now, with a war on poverty and a war on drugs. So a war on terrorism and a war on terror is not likely to end anytime soon, if ever, if that's how we're defining it.
I'm going to get 2 callers on back to back here, both from South Africa. Imad from South Africa, what is your question, please?
Good evening, Mr. Khan.
Hi, good evening.
Thank you for the show. I've got a question for Ms. Kane. I'm an Iraqi citizen, and after the incident that happened in the Abu Ghraib prison, how can we believe the United States saying they're treating those foreign nationals, withholding them for 6 years without trial, and never found them guilty. How can we believe the United States, a democratic country and country looking for justice?
Okay, and also let's get Paul on the line from South Africa with a question or comment as well. Go ahead, Paul.
Hi there, Riz.
Hi.
Just a question for the lady. You know, it's very interesting. The foundation of what the lady is speaking about is that this is like a prison camp, and that it fits in with that convention. What was the name of the convention?
Geneva Convention, yeah.
The Geneva Convention. But the point of the fact is that the Geneva Convention was really constructed to deal with countries at war with each other. In effect, these are civilians who are fighting, and a lot of them are kidnapped, and they end up in Guantanamo Bay. It's not as though United States is at war with any country. So if that is the case, then it's really not legitimate to claim and use the Geneva Convention in the first place.
All right, Paul, thank you. That's a very valid point. I want to get to Emmy McLean first and ask, as we get to the answers for both for Emad and Paul here from South Africa, let me ask you to what extent the issue of the military commissions and the representations that the detainees have is balanced as far as people see it in the conventional sense of legal defense, from your opinion.
There's serious problems with the way that the military commissions are defined, and we will continue to see that as it develops. There was a Canadian juvenile, Omar Khadr, who was 15 when he was picked up in Afghanistan, who was going before a military commission. He was one of the early people to go before a military commission, and when the defense demanded recently that he be allowed access to his detention records to demonstrate the very serious abuse and torture that he was subjected to at Guantanamo, the judge agreed that he should have access to those detention records. And when the judge said that he would stop the trial and not allow the trial to go forward unless those records were produced, that judge was forced to step down and replaced. Now, if that's not an example of an unjust system, I don't know what is.
I've got to ask, Major, you want to respond to this. I mean, overall, the whole Guantanamo and the links, again, with Abu Ghraib and the previous issues that have come up around these incarceration centers, it's really been quite a mess for the U.S.
Well, a couple of things regarding, I'd like to get to the question about military commission specifically. There is extensive discovery. Discovery is when you turn over documents to the other side. I know because I was part of it. I was on the prosecution team. And we are turning over more documents to detainees and their defense counsel than in some cases we would U.S. citizens before U.S. courts. And it's interesting that you would complain about winning a motion before the judge. The judge said he could have access to those documents. That was my experience when I was a prosecutor. We were turning literally everything over.
What about the pressure on the judge to step down, the manipulation?
Well, you know, there
perhaps?
were some other problems with that judge, and frankly, my book, Honor Bound Inside the Guantanamo Trial, discusses the problems with that judge. You know, he was selected because of his experience in capital trials, that is murder or cases where the defendant could face the death penalty. But what I learned when I researched him is that his experience was being reversed. So he did not have a particularly impressive judicial record. And in fact, I thought that he was demeaning. Frankly, I say this in my book. I thought that he was demeaning to defense counsel early on, calling defense counsel sunshine, and some remarks like that I thought were not appropriate. And so to now pretend that the two are linked is not supported. In fact, no one has ever even made that claim.
Emmy McLean, I know you wanted to respond.
It has been made.
Yeah.
It certainly is a claim that has been made. And you know, he was someone who had been brought to the military commission by the Department of Defense, and he was forced to step down moments before the big 9/11 trial was supposed to move forward on the eve of the election, and moments after he said that he was going to stop a trial unless evidence of detention was turned over. And that's just one of many examples. I mean, it's important to note that there is one individual in 6.5 years at Guantanamo who has been convicted at Guantanamo, and he's been convicted based on a plea agreement that was negotiated by the Australian government and Dick Cheney, and he is now home and free in Australia, and there's 275 men who are detained.
Emmy McLean, a quick question. I mean, Paul in South Africa made a very valid point. He said, look, the Geneva Conventions were basically country versus country type of conventions. This is a much more disparate war. Just in a nutshell, can you see this changing the way that the legal representation in these conflicts might occur?
You know, there are certainly things that can, factual circumstances that can change the way that a war is run or that people are detained. But what has happened here and what happened in 2002, what happened in 2001 is an effort to take us completely outside of any legal regime.
Emmy, I have to stop you there because we run out of time. And Major Rotunda, thank you very much for joining us, ma'am.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. Thanks. Our discussion on Guantanamo continues on the next show as we hear some of the stories of those held in the controversial facility. Send in your questions to riza@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time.